Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Last time we did an overview of the collections of hadith, Dr. Shabir, the 6 major ones. Now we want to talk a little bit more in detail, look at each individual collection, how Muslims regarded it, when they were written, all that sort of stuff. So let's start, Dr. Shabir, by looking at Imam Bukhari and his collection.
Yeah, Imam Bukhari died in the year 256 of the Hijrah. That means take away 11 years for the time when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died. We would say that Imam Bukhari died 245 years later after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And because this is such a magnificent work, we estimate that he may have been produced towards the end of his life. He maybe started as a young man collecting hadith and then eventually put them all together into this neat arrangement. It is the fruit of his life's labors. So we can see then that this collection itself was put together a couple of hundred years after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it's purporting to give us information about the life of the Prophet. So events that took place or things that were said 200 years earlier. But how does Imam Bukhari know all of this? Because he has an authentic chain of relay persons, one who told the other, who told the other, who told the other that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said ABC. So Imam Bukhari puts that together.
Well, is there anything unique about his collection?
Yes, his collection is thought among the 6 to be the most authentic. In fact, there is an old saying of Imam Shafi, rahimahullah. He said Imam Shafi is the eponym of one of the 4 major schools of Islamic law, the Shafi school of Islamic jurisprudence. So Imam Shafi said that the most authentic book after the Book of God is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. He's referring to an earlier hadith collection. But Imam Shafi died before he saw Bukhari and his work. Today, the Muslim scholars think that, in general, that Bukhari's collection is the most authentic. It trumps Imam Malik's Muwatta. And
what about compared to Muslim?
And compared to Muslim, there are some scholars, incidentally, who think that Muslim is better, at least in terms of its arrangement as a book of guidance. And some may even think that its hadiths are perhaps more authentic than that of Bukhari. But generally, Muslim scholars hold al-Bukhari's collection to be more authentic. There's a scholar in the Middle Ages known as Ibn Salah. He wrote a book called Al-Muqaddimah, the Introduction to the Sciences of Hadith. And in that book, he tells us, okay, these are the various levels of authentic hadith. So level 1 is that which is agreed upon by Bukhari and Muslim. Level 2, it's in Bukhari but not in Muslim. Level 3, it's in Muslim but not in Bukhari, and so on. He goes down to the various levels. So definitely if a hadith is in Bukhari alone, then this is considered to be more authentic than if it was alone in one of the other collections of hadith. But having said that, it's only a general rule, you can say a rule of thumb. Otherwise, one would have to look at each individual in hadith and scrutinize it based on its own individual merits, regardless of which book it comes from. So it's possible that a hadith is in Bukhari, but it's not the most authentic hadith on the subject at hand. Another book may have a hadith that is more authentic as a statement regarding the present question.
So Dr. you talked about Bukhari and Muslim. What are the 4 others and what is their status?
Yeah, so to be more clear, Bukhari and Muslim are known to be the Sahihain, the 2 authentic collections. The others are called Sunan works, so the one by Tirmidhi and Abu Dawood and Ibn Majah and Nasa'i. So all of these are writers from the larger Persian Empire at the time, and they're all writing in the 3rd century. So incidentally, 3 of them died within the 8th decade of the 3rd century. So Ibn Majah died 273 of the Hijrah, Imam Abu Dawood 275, Imam at-Tirmidhi 279. So you can see, like, again, a couple of hundred years have passed, and they're doing their collection. And then An-Nasa'i died in the year 303 into the next century, but we can say for simplicity, he's working in the same century, the 3rd.
So what's the least authentic? Or which collection do Muslims view as the least authentic of the six?
Of the six, Ibn Majah.
Okay.
Scholars have said about today we see that Muslims may have a simplistic attitude. If it's in Bukhari, it must be authentic and so on. And these are called Sihha Sitta, so dare not question any of these because, they're called Sihha Sitta, which means they're the six Sahih. They're the six authentic works. So how dare you question any hadith in any of them? But our scholars in the past have gone about scrutinizing these hadiths individually. And out of this work of scrutiny, yes, these six emerge as being better than their counterparts. But it doesn't mean that they're absolutely perfect. Muslim scholars hold in principle that only the book of God is perfect, the Quran. But every human work is going to contain some mistakes, even collections of hadith. Yes, what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, spoke by divine inspiration, that could be deemed to be like the infallible inspiration from God. But when it is collected by individuals, preserved in memory, the memory can fail. When it is written, even the writing could be mistaken. When it's related from one person to another, you can imagine at every step of the way there can be mistakes. Mistakes in memory, mistakes in hearing, and so on. So scholars have shown that in Bukhari there are about 100 questionable hadiths. And in Ibn Majah, there is even more. There's probably about 700 questionable hadiths in Ibn Majah, according to some scholarly estimates. So Ibn Majah would definitely be the one, to answer your question, sorry to interrupt you, would be the one that scholars would deem to be the least authentic among these six.
Dr. Shabir, can you comment on the fact that for all of these collectors, they had to sift through a significant amount of hadith in order to make their collection? So I believe, from what I understand, it's between like 90-something% to maybe even all the way to 99% for some of these collectors that they discarded in terms of hadith. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, to answer that question, I must first distinguish between a hadith has two parts. One is the content that is being relayed, the information, and two is the chain of narrators. So how do we count the hadith? Do we count like if a certain thing, let's say A, is the data that is conveyed in the hadith? This A might be related by chain of narrators 1, chain of narrators 2, chain of narrators 3, chain of narrators 4. So do we count this as 4 different hadiths? Or do we say these are all the same basic hadith because we're just counting the data, which is A, right? So it's A through 4 different means. So sometimes large numbers are given, and the large numbers may be because we're talking about the large numbers of chains. So it might be said that Imam Bukhari started out with 600,000 hadiths, but he narrowed them down to only what is in his collection, and his collection only contains something like 7,000 hadiths. And then if we narrow down the repetitions, it comes up to our 3,000 hadiths. Still, regardless of how you count them, it's obvious that we're dealing with massive numbers of forged hadiths, according to the Muslim recollection of this anyway. And, even those numbers could be exaggerated in order to give, people exaggerate things for different reasons. They want to say Imam Bukhari did such a good work of scrutinizing that we started with 600,000 and we narrowed down to this. So look at all the work he did. But of course, in retrospect, it looks a different way. It looks like you had a massive amount of forged narratives, and you have to sift through all of that storm to get to the needle in the haystack, which is what Imam Bukhari did. Nonetheless, this is our reality, that we have to be aware that there were many forgeries, and when the human writers and compilers went about their work trying to put this all together, they had to use a certain degree of human judgment. And human judgment is, as it is, not necessarily like, computer generated, like barcode scanning, that will distinguish between the wheat and the chaff, between the authentic and the weak.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Tired of seeing how Muslims are depicted in media? You can help. Support Muslim Media Hub, the first of its kind to empower young Muslims to create content for film, TV, and social media. Visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com, and donate.